guys, it's Alice, and today I'm going to wrap up the books I've read so far in November. Firstly, I finished Asking for It by Kate Harding. This is a nonfiction book and it takes a look at rape culture in America, what it is and what can be done about it. This book obviously deals with a difficult topic, so I can't really say that I enjoyed this book, but I thought it was informative and I'm glad that I read it, even if a lot of what was in here is not news to me. The book does spend a lot of time sort of explaining and establishing what rape is, which you would think is pretty obvious, but apparently to some people it is not. And it was especially disheartening to read quotes from people in positions of power in America who say the most ignorant things about this topic. And the book is often sort of a little angry and sarcastic in its tone, which I don't blame it for. The whole book is unflinching in how rape is never the victim's fault, which is as it should be. And it takes a look at different areas of society where maybe people don't know enough about this or they don't want to know, and what consequences that has. There were some parts where I felt like maybe, isn't this too obvious? But I realized that that is kind of a naive thought because clearly not everyone, we're not all on the same page with this, which is annoying. Now, I don't live in America, which this focuses on, but there is a lot in here that rings true here as well, I think. I would actually really like to read some books about this topic that focuses on Norway or Scandinavia, because I wonder how differently we handle things here. I think this book is well worth the read for basically anyone, although some parts are a little graphic, so just beware of that, and I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. The second book I finished was The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne Bronte. This is a classic and it's about this woman who has run away from a disastrous marriage and has moved into Wildfell Hall to get away from it. I'm very pleased with myself that I have now read one book by each of the Bronte sisters, and I'm really glad that I read this because it was fantastic. I was surprised by how hard-hitting this book was. It deals with female independence, alcoholism, and abuse in a much more straightforward way than a lot of other classics do. I think sometimes older books sort of skirt around the issues, or they're really vague about it because those things were really shocking back in the day. But this sort of takes it on a little bit more head on, and I really, really like that. I loved reading about the characters in here. I thought they were fascinating, and I especially loved the part where we got to read from the perspective of our female protagonist, which is like the whole middle section. I didn't find the language all that difficult, which I sometimes do with classics. I do think though that there are definitely slow parts in this. There were days where I was reading in this and I felt like it was going real slow, and I feel like maybe this book is a little bit long. I did get through it though, and it was totally worth it because I really enjoyed this, and I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. After that, I read Unnatural Causes by Dr. Richard Shepard. This is a true crime book / memoir, and in it, the author recounts his life and his experience with working as a forensic pathologist. And we take a look at some of his cases as well as how working with the dead for so many years affected his personal life. This was an absolutely fascinating read, and I initially bought this because it was true crime, and it is, but it is also very much a memoir, which worked out really well because I loved reading about both his career and his life. I especially liked reading about the forensic science in this, and obviously some of it is kind of horrible and gross, but it was interesting to see how this field has evolved throughout this guy's career. And although there is something very grim about cutting up dead bodies, I felt like everything was handled really thoughtfully and respectfully. The writing in here feels honest and it's a very accessible read, and I like how the author talks about what life is like among all this death and how he didn't want to face what kind of impact that actually had on him. That bit was very emotional and raw. And I think it's really interesting because he is so fascinated by his own job and he kind of loves what he does, and yet it has this negative effect on him, even though it's really important work. There are some gruesome aspects to this book, unsurprisingly, but overall I just thought it was so fascinating, and I felt like I learned a lot about this profession and what it's like to face all of this on a daily basis. So I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars, and it's one of the better nonfiction books that I've read all year, so I would definitely recommend it. Lastly, I finished Another Day in the Death of America by Gary Young. This is a nonfiction book, and it sort of deals with politics/crime, and in it the author has chosen a random day and takes a look at all of the kids and teens who lost their lives due to gun violence in America in those 24 hours. Now, this came out 3 or 4 years ago, and there was a lot of buzz around this book back when it first came out, and that's when I got this book, and I kind of wish that I had read it back then, because I think now that a couple of years have passed, I've been exposed to so many stories that are similar to this, that I feel like this maybe didn't have the impact on me now as it would have back then. I do think the topic of this book is really interesting, and it's heartbreaking to see the effect that access to guns and the culture around it in this country, the effects that that has, and it's infuriating to see these deaths cause so little outrage because they've just become really common. For me though, there is something about the way that this is written that isn't quite there for me. Like, I felt like towards the end things got really repetitive. There are some parts that feel kind of dry, and I didn't really feel like I necessarily got to know the people that we meet in here, at least not very well, because some of them kind of bleed into each other now. And I've read a lot of nonfiction books where you really feel like you get to know the people in it, and I kind of missed that in this. I also think some of the discussions in this book felt a little simpler than maybe I wanted them to be. Like, I wish it had dug a little bit deeper, although I do realize that maybe that's not what this book is supposed to be. I think this can probably be a good introduction to this issue, but for me, I don't really feel like I got that much from it, to be honest, so I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars, although it might be leaning more towards like 2 stars. So those were all the books that I finished, and right now I'm currently reading one book, and it is From Here to Eternity by Caitlin Doughty. And this is a book where the author has traveled around the world to take a look at how different people deal with their dead. And so far this is really easy to read and very interesting. Okay guys, those are all the books that I had to talk about today. Let me know what you guys have been reading lately, and I will see you soon. Bye!